Thank you. My name is David Millhorn. I'm at the University of Tennessee, and I'll be the moderator for this session. This session is entitled Challenges and Opportunities for Partnerships Among Higher Education, National Labs, Industry, and State Government. How do we all get all parts of this puzzle put together? The American Research University that you know today has its roots in the first decades following the Second World War. During that same period of time, the federal government made large investments because of the need for technology as we're entering the space age. So this first slide that I put up shows from 1949 to 2000, federal R&D divided into two parts, defense and non-defense. And you can see that during the first years after the Second World War, there was slight growth. And then in the early 60s, we started to see a rapid growth as the federal government and universities became more involved with each other. Certain things going on globally, like Sputnik being launched, which got our attention, and the start of the space age with the challenge to get to the moon by the end of the 60s. By the end of this, in 2009, these are all constant to $08. 09, you can see that the federal government's R&D budget, defense and non-defense, was almost $140 billion a year. It's a very large budget. This slide shows the R&D at colleges and universities and how they were being funded. The blue represents federal dollars, again in billions, from 1953 to 2007. So you can see as far as the university or college research budgets involved, it became more and more dependent upon federal funding. The other thing that I found interesting here is universities and colleges self-funding some of their own programs. And some of that is building infrastructure. Because of the rapid growth of the federal budget for R&D, there was a need to develop infrastructure at universities and colleges, hire faculty, build buildings to be able to compete for and win those proposals. These are trends in non-defense, just the non-defense part of the budget for R&D by function from 1953 to 2009, again in constant $08. Several interesting things that show up on this figure. Number one, the yellow is space, and you can see starting in the late 50s through the early 70s, there was a large emphasis in funding space programs. Again, this was Sputnik, from Sputnik to President Kennedy's challenge to get to the moon, led to a lot of funding in that. The other interesting thing here is the growth of health-related research, biomedical research and health, which has grown considerably since the mid-'80s until now, and it takes up more than half of the university. It consumes about half of the university's research. And in this budget for non-defense, it's a little over half of all the other programs put together. Federal research by performer. Here we have listed universities and colleges, industry, federal government, FFRDC. FFRDC is federally funded research and development center. The Oak Ridge National Lab is an FFRDC, so are the other national labs spread around the country. So where was the government putting this money for its research? You can see that they do some of it themselves, that's the blue. So this is in-house research at government installations. The largest money goes to universities and colleges. That's a big part of our budget each year, is money that's coming in for research and development. And there's a little money for industry. Industry is involved, especially the industry around defense and growing various types of programs for the government. Here's the bad news. What's happening now to R&D budget as as a part of the federal budget. And again, this starts back in 1962 here. This is percent of the federal budget. And you can see that in the early 60s to mid 60s, 10 to 12% of the federal budget was for R&D. As we move on through this century, we see that it starts to drop. And by the time we get to 2007, it's only about 8 or 9%, 4 or 5% of the total budget is for R&D. Now, if you look at percent GDP, it's the same story. In the early, late 50s, early 60s, research and development got 1.4% of the GDP, and by the end of the century, it was down to slightly less than 1%, and it's stayed there since then. So there is some concern that the federal government is not placing proper emphasis on research and development. They don't understand the total importance of research and development in growing your economy and growing your security and leading to prosperity for your country. Well, what about the total world? How do we stack up with the total world? This figure shows a pie chart that represents in US dollars, but not from the US, it's US dollars, $962 billion globally each year. Of that, $344 billion is spent for R&D in the United States. That's not just federal, it's private, federal, and other types of R&D. So we're spending still more than any other country in the world, considerably more, but others are growing. Japan, China is growing and will continue to grow. I was a little bit surprised at how little R&D money is going to the European countries to support their research programs. One other one here is, what about the share of researchers? Where are the researchers? If you don't have top quality researchers, you're not going to compete for and win grants. So where are they being educated? Where are they developing their careers? And you can see that 25% of the world's 5.8 million researchers are in the United States, most of them educated in the United States. Here, though, China is much closer. Before, with the money, they're fair ways apart from us, but here they're pretty close. 21%, Japan 12%, the European Union, the 27 countries, 23%. So we're continuing to grow it's another important role of the research university. It's not just winning grants, building research programs. We also have a major responsibility and obligation to the country to develop the next generation scientists, to develop the next generation engineers. This is another slide that's really important. It fits really well with today's topics. R&D funded by source in the United States. The blue bars represent federal government. The red bars, private industry. Then there's some other. The thing to take home here is, if you look at these, private industry is spending about 3 to 4 times as much R&D as is the federal government. And yet, when you look at what the United States is doing in our colleges and universities, it's a very small fraction of our total program. So all through today, we've heard that we have to engage the private sector more. And it is true. There's more money in the private sector than there is in the government sector. It's a good time when private companies are looking for partners, looking for collaborators, but we can't do it with the same paradigm. We have to change. We have to know what those companies want, how we fit in. We've got to know their goals. They may not be the same as the university's goals, their impact. We do know that there are companies, most of them for profit, and they're looking to increase their bottom line. But it's a source of opportunity for us in our universities and colleges to do this. You can't use the same paradigm, in my mind, that you use to go after the federal dollars or the government dollars. It's a different paradigm. The other thing is, you've got to gain confidence. If you don't have confidence, it's not going to work. We all have to add value to the collaboration. Now, partnerships are really important. I want to close by telling you about one at the University of Tennessee. As you know, several years ago, as the gas prices started to go up very quickly, and we were starting to get into a situation where we were concerned about fuel. Where's the fuel coming from? We approached the state government, Governor Breslin at the time, with an idea that our expertise in agriculture and life sciences and in engineering would allow us to do something rather special. We asked the governor for some money to build a biorefinery and start to explore ways to create transportation fuels out of agricultural products. When we first started this, we quickly realized that we didn't have the expertise. So the first thing we did was look for companies around the country that had expertise in this area, that knew how to build a chemical plant, that knew how to do the chemistry. We knew how to do the biology. We knew how to do the farmer part of the project. So we went to our friends at DuPont, and DuPont joined hands with us. We each put in a considerable amount of money from the state and from DuPont to create a biofuels plant here in Tennessee that will allow us to grow a non-food crop, switchgrass, extract the sugars from the switchgrass, and use those sugars to make ethanol, which we can use in automobiles. So we went together on this. DuPont built the plant. We partnered with the money. And we each put in a lot of money. The total is well over $200 million. And we built a plant to do this large pilot experiment. Because when you look at Tennessee and you look out in the eastern part of the state, we don't really have good farmland. We have land. We have land that can grow a fuel crop like switchgrass very well, but not compete very well with corn and some other row crops. So we built this in 2007, 2008. We had 5,100 acres of farmland growing crop. Switchgrass grows very, very robustly here, about 8 tons per acre. We harvest it once a year. So this is land that's not doing anything, maybe feeding a few cows. And so we paid the farmer to do this. The farmer has to plant only one time because it's a perennial. And so we grew this and started making fuel. And we've got to the point now we know we can make fuel at a competitive price. We're running our fuel, ethanol, in all of our university flex fuel fleet, over 200 cars, very well. I drove over here today on ethanol that we made. And now we're taking that same approach with the National Laboratory, who also had a large biofuels program at this time, funded by DOE. So we got the farmers, the state, the university, industry, national lab, all working on one project together. It's been successful. Now we're looking for investors to build the first commercial-sized biofuels plant, 20 million to 30 million gallons, and that's moving along well. The National Lab has been doing basic science on switchgrass and the breakdown of switchgrass to get the sugars, and we've been collaborating with them and using their technologies as they appear in our pilot plant. We've also built a new facility next door to that pilot plant that looks at biomass, because biomass has lots of different uses. We're now looking at biomass as a source of new carbon fiber. And the lab has just won a carbon fiber plant from the Department of Energy. And again, with our farmer agriculture life science piece, working with the National Lab to build a product out of agriculture that can be used to not only fuel the car, but to build the car. So partnerships work as long as everybody knows what's expected of them. Everyone is willing to play a role. We all agree on goals. We agree on things like intellectual property. I find that industry is less difficult to work with on intellectual property than the university or the national lab. They know the business around it much better, and often they're interested more in the license than the intellectual property itself. So partnerships can work. I think it's the way of the future. We've got to rethink at the universities how we interface with industry. We've got to look for partners that allow us to achieve our goal and us to achieve their goal. We all have to win or it won't work. So I think this meeting and this report is very timely. The University of Tennessee embraces this. We've worked in partnerships with the National Lab for a long time and with industry here in the state for a long time. I have with me on the platform today 3 people, all of which represent a different aspect of R&D and potential partnerships. Dr. Tom Mason is first. Tom is director of the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. He is also CEO and president of UT-Battelle, which is a contractor that manages the lab. If you haven't been out to the laboratory in the last 10 years, you should go because it has really changed. With Tom's leadership and his leadership team, we're consistently rated the best laboratory in the DOE system nationally, again this year. And again, it's their leadership. And I would think UT and Battelle's leadership a little bit, but they do a great job. Next to him is Dr. Terry Douglas. Terry's a 3-time graduate of the University of Tennessee. His home is here in West Tennessee. He has been a business person. He's run large companies. He's owned his own company. He was the owner of CTI, which introduced PET scanning into the clinic and PET CT. Terry sold that company in 2005 to Siemens for a little over $1 billion and has now started another company that he'll tell us about today, which is not detection of cancer, but treatment of cancer. Again, using technologies that were developed for physics and national labs for healthcare. And next to him is Representative Mark White from the 8th Third District. Mark has taken a real leadership role in the legislature in promoting technology development. He is a key part of Launch Tennessee that you heard the commissioner talk about and is very much interested. He shows up at the university wanting to know what's going on, and we certainly appreciate that. So what I want to do now is surrender the microphone to Tom Mason, who will talk about the lab, the national lab in this competitive environment.
Okay, see if I can figure this out here. So earlier this morning, I think it was Chad Holliday who introduced the term innovation ecosystem to describe one of the things that sets the U.S. approach to innovation and R&D and the economic development that goes around that apart from others, and really I think gives us some of the competitive advantage that we've seen play out over the last century or so, really. And this panel, as it's constituted, really represents some of the key players in that innovation ecosystem. I think we all have different roles to play, and certainly part of what I wanted to highlight was how in the national labs we are very dependent on the health and success of the research universities. As David mentioned, one of the important ways that we interact with research universities is through the management construct of the lab itself. So UT-Battelle has been managing ORNL since the year 2000. Of course, that's a partnership between the University of Tennessee, the land-grant institution for the state of Tennessee, and Battelle Memorial Institute, which is a not-for-profit R&D organization based in Columbus. And those two entities bring complementary perspectives to the management of the lab from their own missions. In the case of UT as a land-grant institution, economic development is embedded in the very reason for existence of UT. So there's a strong interest in seeing economic development happen around the laboratory for the betterment of the citizens of the state of Tennessee. And obviously there's a strong interest in the kind of research partnerships that we can have that will enable that. Battelle was actually a trust that was set up in the will of an industrialist from central Ohio, and it has an interest because of the language in that will, which was written in the 20s, so it uses different terms than we would today, but basically it's commercialization and tech transfer. The leveraging of the benefits of research for the betterment of mankind. And so that's something we very much think about as we're managing the lab. It's not just UT, though. In fact, through the governance structure, we have the involvement of a collection of universities, the core universities. Vanderbilt is one of them, but they're the kind of southeastern engines of the research university community, and also Oak Ridge Associated Universities, which is a broader consortium of over 100 research universities that we engage in. So it's certainly part of our DNA, and one of the things we've been focusing on, particularly in the last little while, is things that we can do to maximize our impact. I think Commissioner Haggerty mentioned that we are probably the largest federally funded R&D entity within the state of Tennessee. We're actually the largest science and energy lab within the whole country and possibly the world. I don't know that we've ever tried to do that comparison. And we received that funding because of promises that we make, and the promises largely are that there will be a societal benefit for those investments. We love to do really interesting and exciting stuff, but actually we need to do interesting and exciting stuff that matters and will result in improved standards of living, creation of jobs, reduced energy consumption, reduced environmental impacts, and a more secure world. And so the things that we do that are typically the final steps in achieving that impact are an area of great importance. And so the two main focuses have been on moving technology to the marketplace in order to foster economic development. Of course, we do that through the sorts of partnerships that David mentioned, with the biofuels being a great example, and the carbon fiber. So those are partnerships typically that involve industry. In the end, neither national labs nor universities make anything or sell anything. And so we have to work with industry and also with state and local governments. We're working to try and create more of an entrepreneurial culture within the lab. It doesn't mean that every scientist and engineer is going to go off and start a company. They may not be in a research area that's that close to the marketplace, or they may not be that interested in that kind of an interaction. But on the other hand, for those who are, we want to reward that, incentivize it, and also, particularly recently, think a little bit about how we can make sure that the companies that are drawing on our science and technology are successful. And do what we can, in an appropriate way, given that we have taxpayer funds, to ensure their success. Because really, from our point of view, it's all about deployment of technology. And this was something the governor mentioned earlier. We do license our technology. There are licensing fees and all that, but that's not why we do it. It's a byproduct of a well-structured deal. It may be an incentive for a researcher that they get some financial benefit. But the reason we want to license our technology is so that protected intellectual property can turn into products and jobs and that benefit, the promise that we made to the taxpayer. And then another piece of the development of great technologies is really creating a 21st century research environment. And David mentioned how the lab has been transformed over the last decade or so with new facilities and new infrastructure. And if you don't have the right tools, you can't do the research. You won't have anything of value. The other piece that we've been focusing on in recent years is really invigorating our science through graduate research and education. Now, this is one where we're absolutely dependent on the research universities because we don't grant degrees. But we do an awful lot of research, and it's a tremendously rich environment for graduate students to come in and conduct their thesis research at the lab using tools that aren't available anywhere else, whether it's our fastest in the world supercomputer or our neutron source or a nanoscience center. And the environment around it is something that's very stimulating. So we've been working to expand student research opportunities across the range of disciplines that we cover. Fold into that curriculum some entrepreneurial experiences. I always like to remind people that Google was not started by a Stanford professor. Google was started by 2 Stanford graduate students. And so we feel that by having that graduate student presence, it'll actually help our efforts in entrepreneurial activities and engage students in the very large-scale problem-oriented programs that we undertake at the laboratory. So you've already probably got the sense that university partnerships have really been critical to our success. You see this in some of the major projects, things like the Energy Innovation Hub that we lead, the Consortium for the Advanced Simulation of Light Water Reactors, our bioenergy activities, the National Science Foundation supercomputing facility, instruments at our neutron sources, the research collaborations, joint faculty appointments that we have with not just UT, not just the core universities, but universities around the region and around the world. We host many, many guest researchers. Our user facilities are really not built exclusively for our own use. They're intended for the broader community. So we have thousands of researchers every year who come to the lab to use those facilities. They're freely available on a competitive peer review basis. And the reality is, without the academic research community, they have little reason to exist. We would not be able to justify the investments that are made in these very expensive, complicated tools unless we could use them 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, doing, leading edge research where the vast majority, typically 3/4 of the researchers, will actually come from research universities. And then finally, the educational activities, participation in that research, outreach, the graduate education programs, postdoctoral fellowships. So all of those are linkages that we have with research universities. We're also fortunate to host a number of joint institutes, and these are investments that the state has made. And actually they're investments which I think we can now say have really paid off for the state in terms of the results that we've achieved. So the picture actually shows something called the Joint Institute for Computational Sciences. So that's a state investment through UT on the ORNL campus, and it has been the home base for the team that has collected around the National Science Foundation Kraken supercomputer that was part of the largest competitive research award in UT's history. That computer is housed across the quad at ORNL, leveraging our investments in infrastructure and people to run the machine, but the research programs and the support staff are all UT employees housed in that joint institute that was the subject of a state investment. And to be honest, at the time that this was proposed to the state, it was really about UT Battelle winning the contract to manage the lab, and we would not have had the courage to tell the governor at the time that if you make this investment, we guarantee you'll win a $65 million supercomputing award at the University of Tennessee. It would not have been credible. Similarly, the Joint Institute for Biological Sciences, another state investment, is the home to that Bioenergy Science Center that you heard about. And the Bioenergy Science Center was a $125 million award over 5 years, just got extended for a second 5 years. And if you add in the private sector investments through the UT Biofuels Initiative, there's probably in excess of $500 million that have been going into that effort. And there's been really tremendous results obtained in terms of looking at the feedstocks, finding higher yield poplar, and the microbes, discovering the gene that controls the alcohol tolerance of the microbes. And you may remember, if you think about the different types of alcohol with natural fermentation, you can only get the concentration up to a certain point before the yeast kills itself, it poisons itself. And so understanding the genetic basis of that offers the possibility for higher yield. And more recently, actually, a discovery that allows us to convert ethanol to blendable fuel, basically to gasoline, so that you don't have to worry about the blending limits because of the corrosion that's associated with ethanol. So we think those have the possibility to transform the economics of biofuels. It all began with the Joint Institute for Heavy Ion Research, and actually we're starting to explore new directions that can go, some of which may line up with sorts of things you'll hear about from the next speaker. Joint Institute for Neutron Sciences that was instrumental in bringing the spallation neutron source to Oak Ridge, a $1.4 billion capital investment that has about a $200 million a year operating budget, and is really performing really exciting and one-of-a-kind research now. And the Joint Institute for Advanced Materials that is under construction now on the Cherokee Farm campus. In fact, that's going to be the anchor store in the mall at Cherokee Farm. So those are a few examples in terms of the joint institutes. And I should mention that Vanderbilt is involved in the Joint Institute for Heavy Ion Research that goes all the way back to time in Tennessee when the various people who opened up this morning were in different jobs, and Senator Alexander was the governor. A recent thing is this Bredesen Center for Interdisciplinary Research and Graduate Education that was authorized in the special session of the state legislature focused on education a couple of years back. That facilitated the creation of a new interdisciplinary PhD degree program at University of Tennessee at Knoxville. We have now recruited and started off the first 2 classes, 2011 and 2012. We're up to almost 30 students coming in every year, and these are graduate students, and so, 5-year degree, it means we'll have probably in steady state about 150 to 200 PhD students. If you look at the quality of the incoming class in terms of where they got their undergraduate degrees and their GRE scores and so on, this is a cadre of students who would not be out of place at the top engineering or science schools anywhere in the country. And so that was the thought process behind it, and we're really pleased to see that it's off to a great start. And in fact, we're so pleased with it that we're not going to keep it exclusive to UT. We've signed memorandum of understandings with Duke and Florida State, Georgia Tech, North Carolina State. We're talking with Vanderbilt, and I think this is a very good model because of the rich research environment we offer. We have about 1,000 PhD scientists and engineers, and many of them would love to work with some of these students. And in fact, we can incorporate them into our research programs, and that's how we can pay for the whole thing. So it works, I think, all the way around. You heard a brief mention of the carbon fiber facility. This is actually a picture of it, and it's something that we're quite excited about. Again, real theme here is partnerships. There's a DOE investment in the carbon fiber test facility, which is a pilot plant for low-cost carbon fiber. We've got a workforce development component with Roane State Community College with funds from the Department of Education, I think it is, at the federal level. There's an industry consortium that involves 44 companies all across the supply chain, from feedstock to carbon fiber to resins to finished components to OEMs in the automotive industry who want to have carbon fiber parts so that they can meet the CAFE standards that are going to raise the fuel economy levels to 55 miles a gallon by the middle of the next decade. And in fact, we've already seen some benefits from this. The most recent was the announcement of the Dow-Ford joint venture in this area, and in the press release where Dow and Ford announced they were going to work together on carbon fiber, they actually cited the Oak Ridge activity as the catalyst that brought them together, and so that's an indication of how this can work. And of course, we're always mindful of the economic development's possibility. Tennessee is the #3 state in the country in the automotive sector, and I think carbon fiber, as the cost comes down, is going to see greater and greater incorporation into the vehicle fleet, and that has the possibility of really impacting the supply chain, which is where a lot of the jobs are in automotive. And I think I'm pretty much out of time, so I'll stop at that point.
So I'm supposed to be able to figure this out. Do you know where it is? Where to find it? Oh, the folder behind it? Okay. Okay. Where is it? Is it that one? Here we go. There we go. Oops. You'd never know I had 3 degrees in electrical engineering, would you? I'll open this. Can't open it. Okay, here we go. Sorry. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Millhorn, and thank you, Vanderbilt, for inviting me to make this presentation. And as I thought about what I would do, I thought, well, let me just think about the partnerships and relationships that I've had over the years as it relates to the 3 areas that we were talking about, which are really education, research, and industry. And actually, it goes back to a time in 1959, calculate how old I am, when I was a junior in high school. And I think it's very important, this was very important in my development. There was a National Science Foundation summer course in science and math that I attended, and got me extremely interested in potential of a career in science and math. And then following that, when I was a senior, there was actually an Atomic Energy Commission Atoms for Peace van that came to our high school, and in which it was showing us how the atoms could be used for peaceful purposes. This is something that the Atomic Energy Commission was emphasizing at that time, and I got extremely interested in that and actually wrote my senior paper on atoms for peace. So I've had this interest in how radiological sciences can be used for peaceful purposes, and particularly in healthcare. And then if I look at all the different areas in which we've received support as I've gone through my educational process, it's been through industry support, it's been through Schlumberger Scholarship and the Cooperative Engineering Scholarship Program, it's been through federal support, national support through fellowships that I've received, the National National Science Foundation. Also, I was able to do my master's thesis at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and then also was able to do my PhD research at industry, a company called EG&G Ortec in Oak Ridge. And it's just, it was kind of amazing to me as I went through this as to all of the support that I've received along the way to get the education that I got. Then I looked at research. What kind of support did I receive? What kind of partnerships were developed as I looked at, as I did the different research things that I was talking about. Of course, mentioned before the master's thesis research at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. That was a great experience, and then the PhD resource at EG&G Ortec. But as I started businesses, I think the biggest program that's had the greatest success for us has been what's called the SBIR program, federal program for small business innovation research program. And it funds industry research that will lead to commercialization. And many of the developments that were completed at CTI, where we developed clinical positron emission tomography, were started with SBIR grants, and I think, and that still continues today. We're the new company that we're developing called Pronova. We have applied and received SBIRs, and will continue to do that as well. And then we've been able to participate in multiple development grants and partnerships with Oak Ridge, UT, Vanderbilt, and other universities as well at the 3 or 4 companies that I've been involved with. So we have a lot of partnerships and developments that have partnerships and relationships that have worked for us as we've developed our business. I want to point out one in particular, or 2 in particular, that I think is relevant here. About 20 years ago, as we were trying to bring PET to the marketplace and PET-CT to the marketplace, we realized that there needed to be, rather than every site having a cyclotron, that there needed to be these centralized cyclotrons that were then would then distribute the radiopharmaceuticals to multiple users. And so we developed a plan to go out to universities and medical schools, particularly medical schools, and propose to put in a cyclotron and a PET scanner and use that cyclotron not only for research and for patient care at the medical center, but also to use that cyclotron to deliver radiopharmaceuticals, PET radiopharmaceuticals to other users. The 2 places that we went first were UT Medical Center in Knoxville and Vanderbilt University Medical Center here, of course. And there's been a tremendous amount of income that has been received by UT Medical Center and Vanderbilt, much of which has been applied to the development of additional radiopharmaceutical PET radiopharmaceutical compounds. And this is an example of how industry can work with as a commercial entity with universities and hospitals and environments that really are successful for both. And this still exists. After 20 years, there's still radiopharmaceuticals being delivered from Vanderbilt and UT Medical Center, in which both PetNet, which is the company, is receiving income, and Vanderbilt and UT Medical Center is receiving income as well. Just one example. Also, we were asked to talk about issues, challenges that would allow us to be allow us to have improvement in industry in terms of relationships with federal government, state government, et cetera. I'll just say frankly, there's three things that have been the biggest issues that I've had to deal with as we've tried to commercialize products in the marketplace. One is the FDA approval process. We're going to be going through that with proton therapy. It will take at least a year and probably more than $10 million to get FDA medical device approval for that product. Medicare reimbursement is always a problem. Fortunately for us, that we do have Medicare reimbursement approval for proton therapy, so we don't have to go through that process. But PET took, in the 90s, took 10 years and actually gained approval by an act of Congress. Senator Frist, who was here this morning, was really instrumental in us getting approval, FDA approval and Medicare reimbursement approval through attaching us to the FDA Modernization Act of 1997. So there's still issues related to getting PET radiopharmaceuticals, for example, approved through FDA and getting Medicare reimbursement. And most forums that I'm into like this, they hear that same story from me, but very little's been done to change that. Also, as we've got into the healthcare provider part of the market, the state certificate of need requirements have been extremely difficult for us to be successful at. We've applied for 6, I think, and won 3. We currently have a certificate of need for radiation therapy at our site that we won and is in operation, but it's being appealed. That will cost us, that trial is going on currently, and it'll cost us about $1 million and take more than 2 years to really get that completed. So there are things that government, state and federal government can do to really help encourage the commercialization of innovative ideas that come out of the different research centers. So let me talk a little bit about something more positive, which I'm really excited about here. And this is an idea that has been developed by Dr. Millhorn and Dr. Mason and others, and it's the idea of expanding the UT-ORNL Joint Institute list that Dr. Mason showed you earlier to a Joint Institute for Radiological Sciences and Advanced Imaging. Our DNA in our area is really radiological sciences and advanced imaging, and it would be only natural for us to have a Joint Institute in this area. If you look at the technologies for which our area, that is the Oak Ridge, Knoxville, and also the whole Tennessee area that we're world class in, includes all this list that you can see there. Radiation detection, instrumentation. These are a mixture of industries, mixture of national laboratories, universities, medical centers that are spread across the state, from the UT Health Sciences Center to Vanderbilt to what we do in the Oak Ridge and Knoxville area. So the idea is to build a joint institute around these technologies and to allow us to become world-class center for radiological sciences and advanced imaging. We have a lot of support in our area for doing this. In addition to Dr. Millhorn and Dr. Mason, Dean Davis at the UT College of Engineering, who's here, Dr. Jim Roberto from Oak Ridge National Laboratory, Chancellor Cheek and President DiPietro, Many of the UT Board of Trustees have been supportive of this, including the Vice Chairman, Dr. Don Stansberry. So I'm really excited about the potential for developing this and what it might do for our area and for Tennessee. Basically what this will do is we will focus on radiological sciences, but it will be basic and applied research in those two areas, which will allow us to improve research in our biological sciences and support some of the other joint institutes and research activities that are going on. But ultimately, it will be basically used for clinical diagnosis and therapy and advancing our ability to diagnose and provide therapy for cancer patients. We have one of the few National Cancer Institute Comprehensive Cancer Center here in the state, in the Vanderbilt Ingram Cancer Center, and we expect and hope that they will be an integral part of this as well. So what does that look like? Well, these are the entities that are for sure that can be applied, can be a part of this. And the interesting thing is that these are clinical capabilities. It's also in terms of the Proton Therapy Center that we have and our Provision Health Alliance, and also with Vanderbilt potentially. It's a commercial operation, and that Pronova Solutions will be the supplier of the next generation proton therapy equipment. And it's also Cherokee Farm, which was financed by the state in terms of the infrastructure and is now being pursued by the University of Tennessee as the campus for this sort of thing, where the Joint Institute for Material Sciences will be located. And then this whole idea of the Joint Institutes are really a state-driven thing with the government share funding. So this is a good example of how industry, the National Laboratory, University of Tennessee, cancer provider entities like Provision Health Alliance and Vanderbilt University Medical Center, and also how a commercial company like Pronova can really come together and create something that we think is world-class in proton therapy and cancer care. The challenge is, how do you bring all of this together? I mean, how do you really bring all this together to become world-class? I really think to be world-class in something like I think we were in PET, our area is in PET, is to have a clinical world-class program, which we believe that we can develop, to have a commercial entity that is the leader in providing this kind of technology. Couple that with the academic programs that we need from the University of Tennessee for training physicians and medical physicists and others that are needed for this technology, and couple that with our joint institute that we hope to put together to provide the research basis for all that we do. A lot of people would look at proton therapy and they would say, well, it's too expensive, it costs too much. Well, there's something about proton therapy, just like there was for positron emitters in PET, that you have going for you. That is, you can deposit a whole lot more radiation, and this comes from the science and the research. That's why I'm making this point. You can deposit a whole lot more radiation in a tumor with a whole lot less collateral damage with protons than you can in any other way. The problem that is why it's so expensive is because the research and engineering have not been done to make this a less expensive, costly technology for cancer patients. And that's what putting something together like this will allow us to do. It will no longer, in the future, it will not be the most expensive way of treating patients with radiation. It will be the least expensive way to treat patients with cancer. And you do this by putting these capabilities together. So I am excited about the potential for partnerships between among Oak Ridge National Laboratory, University of Tennessee, hopefully Vanderbilt, our commercial entity in Pronova, and also our provider, our clinical provider entities that we have as well. And thank you very much. I'd like to ask I'm just curious, how many people are here from industry? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Millhorn and Vanderbilt and Research Academies. Senator Frist, so good to see you today. I want to reserve my comments today on the partnership with state government. And since I don't have a PowerPoint, earlier I was out in the audience and I was standing next to my colleague, Minority Leader Craig Fitch, who is here today. And he says, yeah, you do have a point, this is not very powerful. And so I quickly reminded him that I was a member of the supermajority in the House and this would cost him dearly. But actually, we have a great working relationship where everyone in the House, most in the House, I think, are very committed to working together and moving Tennessee forward. My background is in education and small business. And it was frustration with government is the reason I got into politics in the first place. I thought I could bring a little private enterprise thinking to government. And this is one reason I've been in the State House now for 3 years, come from the west end of our state in Shelby County and Memphis. As has been pointed out throughout the morning, the state of Tennessee gets about $3 billion in research money for our universities, our private industries, and whatnot. And a couple of years, or about a year and a half ago, I was sitting in a meeting with Speaker Beth Harwell, and we were talking about this. With $3 billion, how can we translate this better into more jobs? And so she asked me to kind of take on the task from the House side and the legislative side is to look into this. How can we be a help in state government and not be a hindrance? What can we do? So I took the challenge very seriously. And for the past year and a half, I've been looking at, going across the state and talking to different people, how can the state help? Can they help in a particular way, or should we just get out of the way? What is the course? And of course, I found, like all of you know, that Tennessee is just blessed with tremendous talent. How many states can brag about having an Oak Ridge on one end, which is the home of the Titan supercomputer, on the east end, on the west end having a St. Jude, which does cancer research, and then all the things in between, our higher education universities like UT and Vanderbilt. Universities in the state have been the forefront of research for generations. I have a special fondness for Vanderbilt because when I was 5 years old, we lived in Nashville. My father was actually going to Lipscomb University at the time and became very sick, and it was Vanderbilt University that did research and was able to save my life at 5 years old because of the research. So I'm a big believer in research. But just because you have great institutions and research personnel, that doesn't guarantee you any success at all. It's a start. But once you attract the great minds in the research institutions, how is a state like Tennessee, how do we keep them? Because we're in a global competitive market. And so we spend the money, the $3 billion that comes in, what happens to it so that we can keep the institutions in the talent and the brain power here in Tennessee. What's a challenge for our state? I'm a free market person, I'm a free enterprise thinker. But I see state government as a voice of leadership and coordination because we at the state level need to be the pep squad, the cheerleaders, the band, and everything in between for all the inspiration, for all the possibilities that each of you spend your career in search of. Without someone bringing us all together, then we really spend our talent and our money and our careers working in individual silos, always trying to grab the latest available research dollar from the other guy. So how does Tennessee, this is the question, how does Tennessee become the global magnet for technology research? It is the desire of our administration. We've had Governor Haslam here this morning, ECD Commissioner Bill Haggerty, and they are engaged. And now we have Launch Tennessee, which is formerly TDDC, and they are continuously looking for ways to answer this question. I really want to give a special thanks to our ECD Commissioner Bill Haggerty and for Brad Smith, who's been the interim CEO of TDDC, now Launch Tennessee, and even our past chairman of the board, Tom Ballard, because for the past year they've been working to keep things going. Because I was really fearful a year ago when I started looking into this that things would just stall out and quit like they're so easy to do in government. But today I'm really full of optimism that we're on the right path in our state because we've got engaged not only in the private and the universities, but we've got engaged state leaders. Now, this hasn't been an easy job because it's always so easy for us to want to remain in our silos. Many say, just give me the money and get out of the way and I'll do my thing. Well, we fight the same thing in government. How many times have you heard a politician say, you know, just I can fix any problem, just give me your money. So that's a problem that exists out there. So, but if you want Tennessee to become #1 in research, we must work together. And this is the kind of the point that I want to make today. Let me give you an example of why the educational process is so important. Because those of us in government, we really want to help. There's no desire to be a hindrance, but the nature of government creates a clog in the wheel of progress, mainly due to the lack of understanding. Consider this. I'm sitting at the table here with Dr. Millhorn, who has a background and a career in genome research. Spent his life is about, entire hereditary information of an organism. I had to Google that. There's Dr. Tom Mason, Director of Neutron Spallation Source Facility in Oak Ridge, and Dr. Terry Douglas, Research in Proton Therapy and Molecular Imaging. Now, I have a sub-major in biology, but as I told you, I had to Google each of these studies just to understand in a small part what they are spending a career talking about. So what happens when they or you come to someone in government and you try to explain your need for research funding? What happens? Last week, I think we did a good thing in state government. For the first time, we put a limit on how many bills each state legislature could carry. In the past, it's been unlimited, and we've had 3,000 and 4,000 and 5,000 bills a year to go through in a 4-month period of time. This year, we put a 15-bill limit on each member in the House. Now, but still at that, even 15 times 99 members, you're sitting right at 1,485 bills if everyone does the maximum. Now, the governor and his administration with 23 departments, they get another 75. So now we're already up to about 1,560 bills. Now, we'll go into session January 28th when we get off recess, and we'll get out about May the 1st. That's the date that we got out last year. So over these next 90 days, we've got to deal with 1,560 bills. And if you really want to read it before you pass it, as we often say, you have to become somewhat knowledgeable about these bills as they float through committees. Now, is that possible, or is that going to happen? And this is where the clog comes up. You know, we've all gone through the learning process. We know the 4 stages of learning, and I love this because the first one is unconscious incompetence. We remember that. That just has government written all over it. That's the stage I don't know what I don't know, and as long as I don't know, I'm fine, and we just move on through life. But as soon as someone like Dr. Millhorn comes to me and says, I'd like to talk to you a little about legislation on genome research, okay, after I get to the deer in the headlights look and everything, he has now introduced me to a new topic. So we move into the second stage of learning, which is the conscious incompetence. And that's where I know what you brought the title to me, but I have no idea what you're talking about. And if we're fortunate enough, we can go to the third stage of learning, which is conscious competence. And that's I know, and now I have a little bit of understanding. I know what you're talking about. But with 1,560 bills to cover in 90 days, it's probably not going to happen on most bills. That's just the nature of where we are. I'm interested in education. I'm interested in sciences and those things. So there's a lot of bills I'm not going to spend as much time on. So how do I get to that third stage of conscious competence? Now, those of you who spend your career in research, you can get into the fourth stage of unconscious competence, which is the bike riding phase or the career research phase, where you no longer have to think about the physics of balance. You just jump on the bicycle every morning and take off. But during the next 90 days, or during the 90 days of period, for most elected officials do not move past the second phase, the phase of conscious incompetence. And we wonder why government sometimes gets a bad name, because that's just the nature of government. But due to no fault of many of the legislatures, time just will not allow for solid understanding of the topic. So that's the reality of the situation. So what's the answer? Is there an answer? Well, it's hard, but I believe it's not impossible. If we're easy everyone would be doing it. We wouldn't have to have meetings such as like this today. I believe that it's imperative for the universities and the private labs and the private industries to make every concentrated effort to reach out and work together. We cannot afford to stay in our silo or in our ivory tower. Why? Because eventually someone else has come along and get it right. And I want Tennessee to get it right. I want us to be the global magnet for what we do. Right now, our state government and our leaders are engaged. You can count on Governor Haslam and ECD Commissioner Haggerty and others in Launch, Tennessee. They're reaching out and they're saying, come together, let's figure this out. Many of you probably have read the book, and I want to bring this up, the book by Daniel Pink, A Whole New Mind. I just finished that book, and I was really impressed with some of the concepts that it brought up. And I want to bring it up as I close today about why I think he hit on a point of kind of where we are and the point I want to make. Mr. Pink says that we're moving from the age of information or the age of knowledge worker and left brain thinking to the conceptual age, where we must learn to create and recognize and put to use our right brain and our creative side. We need to coordinate our creative genius with the knowledge that we acquire. Now, Mr. Pink in the book, if you've read it, he states that there are 6 senses of creative thinking. There's design, story, sympathy, empathy, play, and meaning. But for today's purposes, I just want to point out 2, and that's the 2 senses of symphony and story. Because in symphony, we are challenged to see the big picture, to cross the boundaries. It is the ability to put together the pieces and to see relationships and unrelated fields and to detect broad patterns and bring them together. And that is why we cannot remain in our own silo. And then the second thing we've got to do is we've got to learn to tell the story. You have to create emotion, and you got to capture the attention. And this is why what you have to do when you bring it down on the politics side and the legislature, because you all remember from a child what captured your attention more than anything. It was a story. You remember how the storybook started out, once upon a time in a land far, far away, there was this hero. And the hero, and you want me to go on because we started to capture your attention. Well, this is what we've got to do as a state, and this is what you have to do in your private research institutions and industries. You got to learn to tell the story. We must work to not only develop and transfer knowledge, we must turn our state into a symphony where we share knowledge and we create workable solutions together. You see, as a politician, I may not understand the science of proton therapy, but when you come to me and you tell me your story, that once upon a time there was a child who had a brain tumor, and proton therapy cured that brain tumor, then you have my attention, and then we can start to work together, and we can move forward. So with those comments, thank you very much for your time today. Thank you.
I know we're running behind fairly significantly, but is there time for 1 or 2 questions? So if anyone has a question, just go to one of the 2 microphones. No? Let me ask one question of Terry. Terry, you've worked with lots of universities. What's the biggest hurdle to have a meaningful relationship?
It's actually finding someone that has the same passion that you do for what you're doing. I'm thinking about working with UCLA in the development of PET and PET-CT. There was a professor there that had the same passion, but actually the inventor of it. In terms of working with University of Tennessee and Vanderbilt, both, I think of individuals that caught the vision for whatever it was trying to do. Dr. Leon Partain, here at head of Department of Radiology at one time at Vanderbilt, was the driver behind that, and Dr. Ed Bunicor at University of Tennessee. So I think it's really finding individuals who can share a vision and have a passion and have the ability to take that
Uh, uh,
vision and passion and work with us on it.
follow-up, any question before we adjourn? Okay, I think it's your next. Okay.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Beth Fortune, and I'm Vice Chancellor for Public Affairs here at Vanderbilt. And on behalf of Chancellor Zeppos and Vanderbilt, I want to thank you for attending this meeting this morning. I also want to thank first I want to thank all the participants of all the panels. I think there was an outstanding job all morning. And then I'd also like to thank Christina West and Margie Glick in Vanderbilt's Office of Federal Relations, and Kathy Scambatti and Lori Himmer in the Chancellor's Office for pulling this really tremendous meeting together this morning. I think it was the Chancellor who said that we had a lot of octane in this room this morning, and indeed we did. It's been an enlightening morning, enlightening sessions, very good discussions, and now the task is to turn those discussions into action. And so for those of you who are attending the afternoon session, your action work will continue or will begin in the room next door at 12:30. And again, on behalf of the Chancellor of Vanderbilt and all who participated in this, thank you for being here today. We're adjourned.